Today, I'm speaking with Operator Starsky, a Ukrainian National Guardian, blogger, and inspiration for everyone who is following the war, and of course, for everyone who is supporting the Ukrainian victory. He's created one of the most popular and original YouTube channels dedicated to the international community and communicating Ukraine's position and what it needs in order to be victorious in the war. I'm not sure that actually anyone here needs an introduction. I think everyone will have seen his channel and will enjoy his videos, including the humorous ones that he puts up there as well. Today, we are going to be talking about really a review of the year and looking forward to next year and what has to happen in order for Ukraine to secure a victory. Welcome to Silicon Curtain. Please like, subscribe, and of course, comment as this helps more people find our incredible speakers and content. Please also check out the list of Ukrainian charities that we're going to put in the description of this video. And if you feel like it, do buy me a coffee to support the work that we do. Before you do that, make sure you buy Operator Starsky one as well. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, always a surprise. I don't know where we're going to end up in this conversation, but it's always deeply fascinating and compelling. Well, let's jump in with a question here. Why are there so many calls in the press and even amongst some analysts for Ukraine to negotiate when it seems to me, at least, Russia is perhaps at its weakest point since it started this full-scale war?
I believe back in 2022, I said that the closer Russia is to its inevitable collapse, the more calls about negotiations we will be hearing in the media, messages coming from opinion makers and decision makers and people like that. So to me, it looks like a clear indication that Russia is approaching its end. And despite all the claims that we can see in the media about Putin prepared to fight for 5 more years, 15 more years, we all understand that it's not possible. Regardless of the outcome of the Russian invasion, Ukraine will not be destroyed. And if we are not destroyed, Russia will never win. So regardless of the outcome of this invasion, regardless if Russia manages to control and keep some of the occupied territories or not, they will still lose, they will still be sanctioned, and nobody will lift those sanctions until the reparations are paid to Ukraine. And basically everybody understands that. That's why it doesn't matter what kind of negotiations we are pushed towards, but Russia is not going to win this war unless Ukraine is completely obliterated, which I cannot see happening.
Well, and that's a good point there because it's taken Russia many weeks, if not many months, to take the tiny town of Marinka, I think it's called, and it's expended vast amounts of material, armored cars, armored vehicles, personnel, etc., to essentially take a city with fairly minimal strategic value. And what they've occupied is not a city, not a resource. It's tragically little more than a pile of ashes and rubble. So what victory can Russia possibly hope for?
Only imaginable victory, fake victory. I can tell you a lot about Marinka because my first deployment was in Marinka in 2015. It was exactly when Russians attempted to occupy this village, because it's hard to call this place even a town. It's a village. Its population was 9,000 people in 2022, and I don't know. I believe in those 5 houses next to mine, like more people live than in Marinka. But the fact is, in 2015, Russians attempted to take control over this village. They used this so-called international brigade called Cheburashka, and this, if you know what Cheburashka, it's Cheburashka.
Seriously, I mean, is there nothing they won't defile and destroy?
Yeah, so they were obliterated by the Ukrainian troops. We had our special forces of Ukrainian police and National Guard and armed forces of Ukraine involved into defending Marinka. And basically, we used our multiple launch rocket systems to completely destroy Russian troops back then in 2015. And since that time, they made numerous attempts to take control over this village. So basically, it's not the matter of several months. I would say they tried to take it for almost 10 years. And you can imagine what kind of losses they faced in Mariinka since 2015, since the time I remember, right? And in November 2022, Mariinka was abandoned by the local population. Everybody got evacuated because it was pretty much destroyed already back then. And currently, you won't see, like Russian propaganda likes to portray grateful Ukrainian people liberated from Ukraine, meeting invaders, because there's no local population left in Mariinka since the last year. So what kind of victory we're talking about? We're talking about lost Russian Novocherkassk troop carrying ship. We're talking about other vessels destroyed this year. We're talking about like 5 airplanes destroyed over the past week. We're talking about thousands of Russian personnel eliminated, and we're talking about several hundred Russian officers that were killed on the Ukrainian soil in the past 2 weeks. Basically, I will make an update regarding this as well. Hard to call it a victory. Basically, hard to call an army that didn't manage to take even a single major city in Ukraine a winning army or victorious army. I cannot see that at all. So it's really hard to imagine what kind of victory they're talking about. But again, Russians like to live in this convenient bubble made out of dreams and fantasies, and convince everybody else that this is reality.
I think more like nightmares, and it's turning into a nightmare for their own citizens as well, very rapidly. We'll turn to that in a minute because you've mentioned Novocherkassk, and that gave me an extraordinary kind of sense of deja vu, because when I rented an apartment in St. Petersburg, it was next to a metro station called Novocherkasskaya. So I'm like, okay, right, interesting. This was quite a substantial ship, and according to the original invasion, this would have been a key vessel in potentially invading Odessa, which of course they weren't able to do. Obviously, you're not going to tell me exactly how it was destroyed. There is quite a lot of speculation, but nonetheless, it has been utterly destroyed. There are photographs showing little more than a lump of charred metal in the sea. It's quite spectacular. But apparently, Shoigu and many Z patriots have been telling Putin that no, it's but a scratch. It reminds me a little bit of the Monty Python, carry on fighting. But they've been telling Putin that this thing can be fixed within 6 to 9 months. Don't worry, Mr. Tsar, everything is fine. Is he believing this BS? I mean, and is anyone believing this kind of BS anymore within the Russian system?
Nobody does. They perfectly understand the reality. They perfectly understand that they have tremendous losses. That's the reason why Putin um, launched that mobilization last year, right after his promises that there will be no mobilization in Russia. So they faced this challenge when their invading army was completely annihilated in Ukraine, and that's why they had to find more human resources to supplant the dead, right? Um, and they have really good and clear understanding that they're losing a lot of men, and they rely on their population, their manpower, basically, because right now we have this situation when Russians can mobilize approximately 20,000 men per month, while losing approximately the same number, but losing approximately 20,000 dead, and several times more wounded Russian soldiers. So, of course, it will take some time, and of course, they're not sending those troops marching towards Ukrainian border and towards Kiev, because nobody fights like that. So they simply feed those men to the units, instead of those men that were lost during combat, during those meat assaults, during ambushes and our strikes, and they keep feeding those men, gradually, over and over again every single month. So, according to our calculations, of course, this can last for several more years, at least until maybe 2026. But eventually they will run out of resources, because even though currently there's a lot of different speculations, a lot of different fakes regarding the state of Ukrainian defenders, regarding our personnel, but at the same time, we have a different sort of motivation, and Russians will eventually run out of manpower and everything else. Their tanks, their airplanes that they produce less than those that are being destroyed on a daily basis, on a monthly basis. So eventually, they will have to think about something else.
Well, I did the maths. My maths isn't great, I have to say, but they seem to have lost in the recent offensive between 15 to 20,000 people in order to gain 2 to 3 kilometers of territory. And when we're talking about sort of Passchendaele or Somme First World War type losses here, absolutely extraordinary. They don't have enough people, if you were to extrapolate that out, to reach Kiev, even reach Kiev, let alone to take the suburbs or something like that. At what point do they simply say, okay, well, this enough is enough? Or is there a risk here that they're going to dig in and they're going to uh, carry on fortifying the lines? Because without, as General Zaluzhny has said, without some kind of technological breakthrough or without some kind of capabilities, actually, this does present a challenge, breaking through highly fortified Russian lines, even if the people behind them are not particularly well trained and not particularly well equipped.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we need different solutions, including F-16s that are hopefully coming to Ukraine anytime soon. Um, and of course, it's really hard to take control over positions that are heavily fortified, that are covered with artillery, and of course, positions that are surrounded by minefields, um, numerous minefields. Um, so yeah, we need some sort of new approach, but I'm sure that they will come up with a solution. I'm not a general yet, thank God. So maybe maybe we'll see something in the next year. But at the same time, there is a risk, of course, that eventually, at some point, they will just dig in. They will decide that yes, this is where we want to stop, and because they realize that they, of course, they will not be able to reach Kharkiv, they will not be able to reach any other major city, and basically this invasion will result in taking several villages and towns and smaller cities, but not regional centers. It's like taking villages around New York, but not New York itself, right? And this is what we see. Basically, they proclaimed regions like Zaporizhia, like Kherson, connected officially to the Russian territory, even though they don't control the cities. So it's kind of funny. There is another thought, though, that if this keeps going like that, Russians keep attacking without having enough people to perform some significant operations and gain some significant results. Maybe eventually we will see that some, as we call it in Ukraine, unexpected effing stuff happens in Russia, and it will completely change the situation, and it will completely maybe stop this invasion. Maybe it will boost this invasion. Who knows? But here in Ukraine, we all believe in unexpected effing stuff. Yeah, so to say, that always helped us to withstand any challenges, even though you should rely on this stuff usually. But yeah, this is what happens all the time.
Mr. Budanov seems to be quite capable of creating unexpected situations as well.
Yeah.
And this is something I've been saying throughout the war. I discussed this with Ben Hodges, and even a year ago, I said to him, look, it feels to me like this war could well be won through sort of either a completely unexpected event or a manufactured unexpected event. And this was before the mitiage or sort of coup, mutiny of Prigozhin. And I think in the fullness of time, we'll learn more about that and the role of Ukrainian sort of intelligence services within that particular event. But I said to Ben Hodges, it seems to me that Washington and possibly Berlin as well are putting pressure on Ukraine not to escalate the I would say the this unofficial warfare, this alternative warfare, and yet that seems to me the best chance of actually ending the war, collapsing Russia, forcing it to turn on its own internal problems. You may not want to comment on that, but do you think it's important in the year ahead for this kind of alternative warfare not to have any restrictions put on it?
Absolutely, because common warfare, загальновійськова війна, загальновійськовий бій, common warfare cannot exist without alternative warfare. They should coexist, of course, and in order to be effective, in order to reach your goals, you have to use all measures, all tools that you have. Regarding the aid to Ukraine, I don't really think that we can see this those attempts of forcing Ukraine to negotiate with Russia yet. We can only see different talks and rumors in the media. The day Ukraine is forced to negotiate with Russia will be the day when the military and humanitarian aid, well, military aid on the first place, will completely stop coming to Ukraine. That's the only thing, the only possible way to see this. And currently we can see absolutely opposite picture, because one way or another, in 2022, when everybody were talking about, asking Ukraine to negotiate and blah, blah, blah. First, there were HIMARS systems, then there were Leopard tanks, then there were Abrams tanks. Now we're talking about F-16s that will be coming to Ukraine. And maybe in 2024, we will see some other weapons, maybe long-range missiles, maybe some new drones, new radio electronic warfare measures that will be introduced. And we are talking about maybe not raising, but improving military aid to Ukraine one way or another. It's really hard to deny that in 2022 we could only dream about airplanes and again, not only F-16s, a lot of airplanes were and helicopters were also brought from other countries, like those that were made in Soviet times. So only a blind or completely deluded person will say that this aid almost completely stopped and nothing happens and nobody wants to support Ukraine, because seeing F-16s flying in the Ukrainian sky will obviously be saying an opposite.
Well, apparently that hasn't happened yet, but that hasn't prevented Shoigu from claiming that several have been shot down already, which is classic Russian. But what you mentioned earlier, was it 4 or 5 Su, I think 24s have been shot down literally in the last 2 weeks. That's an extraordinary tally. And I wonder what might have prompted that. Now, I know that there were additional Patriot batteries provided. That may well be one of the reasons there. Or it's been discussed a creation of certain traps, where Russian fighters were not expecting various air defense to be and so on. Again, I don't expect you to comment on the details. But if that is down to this provision of new munitions, it's incredibly important, isn't it, to demonstrate that this isn't wasted, that Ukraine is able to, as soon as it gets capabilities, it's able to deal devastating blows. We saw, as soon as ATACMS were available, that extraordinary strike on sort of Russian airfield with helicopters. We saw, which got almost no coverage in the Western press, which I'm amazed at, is the strike on the space communications base in Crimea. And what has been covered, of course, is the Novocherkassk, because that is so unbelievably spectacular. At least the newspapers have kind of covered that a little bit. But there is a trend here, isn't there? Give Ukraine what it needs, and immediately it provides an incredibly effective demonstration of what those capabilities can achieve.
Yeah, I agree on that. The only, let's say, the only strong side of the Russian army is that huge number of Russian vehicles and tanks and artillery and aviation. And basically, that's it. We're not talking about professionalism. We're not talking about, I don't know, advanced technologies. We're not talking about proper training. We're not talking about valor or courage or anything like that. Like, we're fighting against convicts. We're fighting against some people from Asian Russia that were forcefully mobilized, basically, to fight in a foreign country. What kind of professionalism are we talking about? Here it's a different picture, because Ukraine was cooperating with NATO for years, since 2008, I believe. And we had numerous trainings together with our NATO colleagues. And currently, Ukraine has sophisticated artillery. We have all kinds of advanced weaponry that is successfully being used against Russians every single day. And from the reports of the general staff, we can see that every single day Russians keep losing gazillions of people, tanks, and etc., etc. And of course, in order to compensate somehow for that, yeah, they fight on the internets, creating those stories about F-16s that were destroyed even before they arrived to Ukraine, and basically weeks before Leopard tanks arrived to Ukraine, we saw the same pretty much. A lot of photoshops, a lot of different fakes, but one way or another, of course, if you give us everything we need, this war may end really, really soon, because Russians cannot compare to the Ukrainian defenders whatsoever.
And to those photos of the year, I'll ask you what your ones standout sort of images of the year were. One for me, of course, was the Storm Shadow attack on the Black Sea Fleet headquarters. That was glorious and spectacular, and I mean, it may be sort of odd to feel a sense of pride in that, but I think that is certainly due there. And the fact there was no reaction, no repercussions from Russia, despite all of their threats. The other one was seeing the Gaz AA 1930s armored trucks trundling on the way into Avdiivka, but hearing the kind of Ukrainian drone operator almost sort of die laughing with a spectacular swearing filled commentary. Those are two of the standout images for me. But of course, there are other tragic ones. We'll come on to those in a minute. I don't know what moments or what images stood out for you.
There was this pop singer Vitaly Kozlovsky. So he's as famous as, oh my God, really hard to compare. Like Elvis Presley in Ukraine, let's say. Not okay. I don't want to over, overrate this man, but anyways, he's a really famous guy, and he was mobilized, and he decided to serve in our brigade in the infantry. Then he was attached to the artillery unit, and after making selfies with every single soldier in our brigade, because everybody knows him. So he went to the front lines, to the area of Bakhmut. So basically, we went together with him, and his first deployment was approximately 6 kilometers away from Bakhmut, 6-8 kilometers away from Bakhmut. So he was in the team that maintained a howitzer, and I remember that there was a command to destroy Russian rapier, so-called rapier. It's a cannon used against armored vehicles and tanks, and also against structures. So this rapier cannon was annoying our guys, so they asked us to suppress it, and I think 2 or 3 shots, and this rapier was completely destroyed, and it was first ever combat mission for this singer, for Vitaly, and he was so happy. He was like, "Oh my God!" Like, imagine you, like, his only weapon before joining the army was a microphone. He's a professional singer, and really good singer, by the way. And his first ever combat mission on the front line, and their team destroyed a rapier. And this moment I witnessed, basically, and this is something that I will remember about 2023.
I'm sure he'll be singing songs about that at some point, which will bring that all coming back. Let's turn to another favorite theme here, which is the collapse of Russia. This is a theme which, I was accused of being a Lvov nationalist recently because, I talk about the collapse of Russia. I talk about how all of the nations that are imprisoned by that toxic parasitic empire need to be released. I talk about how Russians need to be released themselves from this prison that they have created for themselves, this sort of trauma zone that keeps them constantly entrapped. When Russia loses this war, when it can't claim any kind of victory, any plausible victory, which I think will happen. Actually, I believe sometime next year is my belief, but it's difficult to know exactly when. Um, Russia itself seems to be descending ever more into farce. We've joked about various things over the last year and a half, but this last week it just seems to be nothing short of a kind of tragedy slash comedy slash sci-fi movie. And there was this spectacle, I don't know if you're following it, of the so-called naked party, where a bunch of talentless Russian celebs who essentially got to the positions they've got through little more than being loyal to the regime and not having an original thought in their heads. Um, they had this party, and it's not particularly, they weren't all naked. It wasn't particularly outrageous, but in the circumstances where Russia is unleashing a genocidal war against its neighbor, when Russians are dying like flies daily, to hold something as sort of tone deaf as this party was quite extraordinary. And it does seem to have got people actually rather upset, well, especially the Z bloggers. Um, my first thought was this resembles the Hunger Games. This is the big city where this sort of outrageous foppishness is taking place. Um, but underneath it, you've got brutal tyranny, and you've got everybody, everything being consumed. Um, I'd be interested to hear whether you also think this is a sign of the end of times, because it seems to me the regime is about to turn on its own. It's about to turn on loyalists to the regime and consume them in the way that it has consumed, common people and those outside of Moscow to date.
First of all, returning to what you said in the beginning, if Russians say bad things about you, it means that you're a worthy man. And vice versa. When they say some good stuff about you, like they say about Elon Musk, for example, it means that, oh my God, there's something wrong. And it doesn't matter where you come from, like Poland, Indonesia, Japan, uh, Kenya, Canada, the UK. If you support Ukraine, you are a Polish Banderit nationalist, whatever. Like even if you're a Polish Jew, doesn't matter. But one way or another, regarding their loyalists, one of the brightest examples is Anton Krasovsky, who was poisoned several days ago. And Anton Krasovsky was a Russian propagandist. He wasn't the smartest among them, I must say, because, like, remember in 2022, he donated blood to the Russian terrorists, and they made this huge PR out of it. And fun fact is that in 2017 he openly confessed that he's HIV positive. So I think we need more blood donors and propagandists in the Russian army like Anton Krasovsky. But again, he wasn't smart enough because he was saying what he feels, what he felt, basically. And on the Russian TV, where everything is staged and there's no freedom of speech, you cannot do that. That's why eventually, when he started dreaming on the national Russian television about drowning and burning Ukrainian children. Um, it doesn't really work like that on the Russian television, because on the Russian television they must remain like a bit neutral, a bit aggressive, but everything according to the agenda. You don't do that. You don't use your emotions unless it's required by the instructions made by the Russian Stratcom. So that's why he got fired, and eventually he basically repeated the same words in a different TV show, and he got poisoned. But you see, the problem is it's not a problem to us, to people who support Ukraine, but it's rather a problem to those who support Russian terrorists. Their problem is that they are in danger, because Russia has this old tradition of eliminating their allies, starting from Stalin. You remember when Stalin had this picture with his comrades, and eventually same picture, but those comrades were shrinking in numbers, and they have this old tradition of eliminating unnecessary witnesses, especially those who worked for them and those who had access to different information. And people, basically public people, like Tucker Carlson, like Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter, they know how to blackmail him, of course. We all know how to blackmail Scott Ritter, basically. But people like that, they are in danger, because when, again, regardless of the outcome of the Russian invasion, they will be eliminated. Because nobody needs witnesses, and they know too much. And a lot of people in different organizations, different far left, far right movements around Europe, supporting Russian terrorism, they're also in danger, because sooner or later there might be a question regarding their elimination issued by the Kremlin. So it's 100% happens, and I believe that this happens. And on the other side of this, there's always security service of Ukraine that will again use all kinds of measures to make the Russian terrorists and the supporters of the Russian terrorism pay for what they've done to Ukraine. So being a Russian supporter nowadays is a really, really dangerous job, I must say.
It is. And I think not enough people understand how that system works. I mean, we don't fully know the architecture of Russian propaganda, but I think we know enough. And I had a rather interesting drink a couple of years ago with somebody who was a researcher in the first rung of Putin's team. She was an academic, and it's kind of interesting process. She wasn't given a script of any kind. She was just given a scenario. Putin's going to be, let's say, on the Black Sea, whatever. He might do some diving, etc. So you go in and research possible scenarios. So the very first layer is pretty factual with almost no script. But there are like half a dozen layers above it that will refine and refine and refine that message down. But it's interesting, isn't it? When you look at someone like Vladimir Tatarsky and Prigozhin, they were given a script and they decided it wasn't good enough. Their parts weren't big enough. So they were going to start to improvise. And I think the minute you improvise within that Putinist system, that's when you come to a horrible end.
Yeah, it's really dangerous. So, one thing that they can do right now is probably, I don't know, contact authorities and tell them everything they know, and help the civilized world to finish the threat of the Russian terrorism. Um, I would like to see that happening, and Prigozhin's story is, and not only Prigozhin, when we talk about Russian former heroes that were turned into victims, we should also name Igor Strelkov-Girkin, the one who basically started the, not started, but conducted the invasion of Crimea, the one who conducted the coup in Donbass, the one who coordinated all kinds of weapons coming from Russia to Donbass, the one who shot down MH17 Boeing. And he was considered a Russian hero for many, many years. And where he's now, he's in jail because he didn't play according to the scenario. And eventually he said that he wants to run for presidency. Oh my God, you don't do that in Russia, man. Just forget about it. The moment he said, the moment he told his audience about his intentions, he got arrested instantly for being an extremist. And this is how they can deal with all of their former supporters. And this is what they will do, because you don't improvise, you don't change, right? You don't question Russian agenda. If you're recruited by them, you have to obey, you have to follow this agenda, you have to follow the instructions. If you don't do that, remember Prigozhin, because you have a big chance of meeting in person.
And this extends down to minor figures as well, back to these celebrities, because immediately after it became apparent to them that they deviated from the acceptable script at this semi-naked party, all of them started recording groveling apologies to the Tsar, with one interesting exception. Ksenia Sobchak did not apologize. Rather, she said some absolutely horrific statement like, well, people die every day, people suffer every day. I don't see why I have to, limit my lifestyle and my expression. That to me suggests she has a special level of coverage within the regime. So again, this is dangerous for the West as well, because we're taken in by this puppet show over and over and over again. Russian disinformation percolates through our media and gets lapped up. Ksenia Sobchak is still labeled a liberal or an oppositionist. I see in some articles, not all, if they're written by someone who knows what they're talking about, but this is danger, isn't it, in the year ahead? And what can Ukraine do about this to help prevent this Russian BS being reproduced throughout Western media, even in countries which are nominally, like Britain, extremely pro-Ukrainian?
So first of all, we need several solutions. One of them is, let's say, we need to change legislation. We need to introduce legal solution that would help the civilized countries fight the Russian propaganda and fight terrorism and informational terrorism. In 2022, in October, the Parliamentary Assembly of the European Council recognized Russia as a terrorist regime. And in November, the NATO Assembly did the same, basically. So Russia is an officially recognized terrorist country nowadays, like Iran or North Korea. Worse than Iran, though, because Iran has only 3,000 sanctions and Russia has over 18. But one way or another, we need a legal solution that should put this to an end. That should stop the propaganda of terrorism from spreading in the media and spreading in the other communication channels, because the result of propagating the terrorism in the media and on the television is death, destruction, and suffering, which is basically the terror. So we need a legal solution. Of course, you cannot just walk around in Berlin or Paris and openly spread the ideas of ISIS or Al Qaeda or Taliban because you're gonna get arrested for that, because you're spreading the terrorist ideas, so the ideas that were condemned by the whole civilized world. And same should be applied to the Russian terrorism as well, especially considering that their informational terrorism is the worst thing ever. Their propaganda is terrifying. So it's a legal solution that should be introduced, that should be delivered to the governments and to the international governments, like the Parliament of the European Union, for example. Another solution is we should expose the Russian network, the Russian opinion makers. We should expose the way Russian hybrid warfare works. Of course, it's not an easy task, because this is something that is being developing constantly and changing and adapting according to the situation, because Russians are very good at it. But we should study, and we should introduce this. We should expose their agents of influence, their paid opinion makers, paid organizations that share their terrorist ideas in the civilized society. So this is something that we should do, and this is something that I will dedicate my life and experience to in the upcoming year, together with my team as well. Not as a military, but as a communication specialist.
That's very powerful, isn't it? Because even at many events that I attend, there are too few Ukrainian speakers. And when Ukrainians give to me what is a very factually based, very strong, evidence-led view on what's going on, often they can be either mentally or even literally labeled as extreme, emotional, not sort of balanced and objective enough, because, well, of course they're going to say that. They're under attack, aren't they? I've even heard these little kind of hints from academics who are ostensibly pro-Ukrainian, who know quite a lot about Russia and its past activities. It's more definitely needs to be done here, doesn't it? In actually putting these forward and actually trusting in Ukrainian voices. I don't think you have the same doubts if you were presenting to an audience of people from the Baltics, for instance. They'll immediately go, "Oh yeah, we know what you're talking about there."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's different audience, but one way or another, there are facts, and as a communications person, I can tell you that if you don't have proper channels of delivering your communication to the audience, of course you will fail, regardless of how much important your information is, regardless of the fact that you have. But yes, you will fail. So again, we have to have proper channels of communications, of course. And we have to speak facts. We have to give facts to the society. We have to conduct journalist investigations on all the Russian agents of influence in Europe, in the US as well, because we expect to be able to operate in the US as well, collect information, do our research on the Russian technologies of hybrid warfare and informational warfare, and give this to the public expose this to the public, so public will become more acquainted, more protected from the Russian propaganda, and more educated, of course.
Well, I've got two more questions. We'll end on the one which is what needs to happen in order to ensure a Ukrainian victory and limit the amount of sort of suffering and death that Ukraine experiences in order to achieve that victory. Well, let's tackle that one last. The question before that, though, is quite a speculative one, but what we talked about earlier, the incapacity of the Russian war machine really to have any substantial gains in Ukraine. Some analysts and media looking at that will say, okay, well, you know, Ukraine is not going to lose in the sense that Kiev and the major cities cannot be taken. Therefore, what are we worrying about Russia? What are we really worrying about it? It's a paper tiger. It's a kind of Potemkin superpower. But the question here is, does that underestimate the capacity of Russia to create chaos and misery? Because if it fails in Ukraine, isn't it the case that they won't just sort of stop and go, oh, well, you know, let's all go back home and do something else instead? They're already actively talking about moving south. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. There is active discussion amongst Z Patriot bloggers that, okay, well, you know, we picked the wrong foe here. Ukrainians turned out to be tougher than we thought. Let's turn south. What do you think the risks are of a revanchist Russia that is now addicted to warfare, that has structured its economy and its political system based on internal war? Who could be the victims, and how do we need to prevent Russia from unleashing its terror on other countries?
It's a very good question, and considering that Russia mentioned Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and other Asian countries, we must expect them to hit the Western countries on the first place, not the Eastern countries. And they will start their invasion from destabilizing Western countries, from numerous protest actions and calls to exit NATO, exit the European Union, and destroy partnership between the countries within the European Union. And when it happens, then they will start their invasion when they know that those countries are less protected, when they know that there's no unity between former partners. This is when we will see Russian tanks on the streets of German cities, Baltic cities, streets of France, of course, because Medvedev mentioned France many, many times. He's dreaming about conquering France.
Solovyov mentioned Lisbon on several occasions.
Oh,
Vladivostok to
yeah.
Lisbon, which is, yeah, ambitious, I would say.
Yeah, but he's a liar because he is dreaming to return to his villa in Italy, actually, that was taken from him. And only after this is done, they will invade Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. And regarding the Russian collapse, of course, when Russia loses in Ukraine, several things might happen in Russia itself. First of all, we may see the removal of current ruling regime, which is likely, even though, you know, even formerly we all had our doubts about it, that it's even possible, but everything's possible. Judging from what's happening in Ukraine right now, everything's possible. I can tell you this as a person who survived the siege of Kiev, but this is something that we may probably see, the removal of the ruling terrorist Russian regime. Putin will be removed. Maybe some of his generals will be removed. Some other generals will start an uprising against Putin and his goons. And this is something that we should expect. But there may be another scenario which is, I would say, more dangerous, because they will push back, they will withdraw, and gain reserves, gain power, gain new resources, and develop new strategy of invading Europe. And as I already mentioned, it will start from destabilizing European countries. It will start from those massive protest actions by people who were told by Russian opinion makers and pro-Russian opinion makers that they should go on the streets and call their governments to exit NATO, exit European Union, stop helping their friends, start finally think about their own countries, because we're helping others, but nobody helps us, and we should think about ourselves in the first place. And this is how those nationalist movements will be growing in those countries, destabilizing everything that makes Europe a Europe, right? So this is something that we should be prepared to, and this is something that Russia will be introducing, again, regardless of the outcome of this invasion, especially now when they're so close to their own demise, and they have clear understanding that the only thing that can push Ukraine towards negotiations is if Ukraine loses the support of the civilized world, and we cannot let this happen.
And the last question, of course, is what do we need to do to accelerate that? What does the West, and in particular Europe, because I think the US is becoming less predictable. We know that on the extreme end of the sort of MAGA GOP, apologies to anyone who counts themselves as a pro-Ukrainian MAGA, nobody really understands that position, but I know there are a few of you out there. So, you know, but certainly we see that extraordinary Russian narratives are percolating into the extreme ends of the GOP. But we also hear that in that Kennedy candidate, I forget his first name, we see the same or similar Russian narratives percolating into the left side of American politics as well. So let's park America for now. It's inherently scary, I think, what's sort of going on and what might happen there. Even if Biden and his team get in, Jake Sullivan has hardly, I would say, got a robust strategy for Ukrainian victory anyway. So it's really down to Europe. What does Europe need to do in order to accelerate Russian defeat, accelerate Russian collapse, and ensure that Ukraine has a substantial, spectacular victory?
Europe must accelerate its development of its measures of countering the Russian propaganda on the first place, because Russia is fighting on both fronts. It's informational front in Europe, and it's the front line in Ukraine. And if we fail on the front line in Europe, we will fail on the front line in Ukraine as well. And this is something that should have been done already in 2022, or better, earlier. A lot of European politicians, and especially European military, they were acquainted with Russian hybrid warfare. There were plenty of studies done on the Russian hybrid warfare, Russian informational terrorism, and still we have no institution that is capable of introducing any sort of solution that can be implemented on the level of governments to stop this propaganda from spreading, to stop Russian misinformation. So this is something that must be done yesterday. Okay, and of course they have to give Ukraine what our army needs, and I'm talking about artillery shells, something that we do really need right now. Artillery shells. I'm not talking about smart shells. I'm talking about just ordinary 155 millimeter shells, and long range missiles, and enough airplanes, and then we will do the rest.
Hopefully, decision makers are watching this. I've spoken to a number of people who are influential within Europe this year, and I think the big plan for the next 12 months is to get people like them back on the show. Benjamin Tallis, Gustav Kresil, and others, Nicola Tenza, people who really are able to meet and speak with bureaucrats, decision makers, those in the military industrial complex. Before we hit record, I was describing an event I went to in Paris, and some of the messages were encouraging. Some of the messages, unfortunately, were the same, as long as it takes kind of BS, which is not going to work in the next 12 months. I'm hoping your initiative delivers huge success. I very much hope that we will get the chance to introduce your powerful voice to a European audience. I don't think the Brits need an awful lot of convincing, but nonetheless, it'd be great if we get the chance to get you in front of an audience here. And let's not just hope for Ukrainian victory. Let's supply what Ukraine needs to make that an overwhelming and certain victory.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, my friend. It's been a while, actually, and I would also like to say thank you to you personally and to your viewers, and to all the people of the civilized world who support Ukraine, who care for our refugees abroad. Again, it's very, very important to us, Ukrainian military, and of course, big hello to the UK and especially Cardiff.
Cardiff, excellent city there. OS, thank you so much. As always, it's a massive pleasure. I hope to repeat this again soon. We should probably kick off a kind of monthly conversation, because I'm having similar monthly conversations with Anna, just to keep this pressure up continuously. And we're going to kick off a second channel where we talk about individual news stories and have a kind of maybe a sort of Q&A panel where we discuss various stories in detail. I'm hoping you can be involved in that. Slava Ukrainia, have a fantastic new year, and I look forward to meeting you in 2024.
Героям слава. Merry Christmas to you and your family.